So now that all of our pulleys are put together and the supercharger plate is on and the supercharger is mounted up, I'm going to be putting my pulley back on the water pump, and then we'll be starting our process of putting in all the charge piping. Most of the charge piping will fit without any modifications, but there are a few we're going to have to change. My stock xenon headlights have this converter in them, so we're going to have to take these out by removing the two screws on the bottom and relocate it so that the charge piping can slip past it. This is only necessary on the driver's side of the vehicle. The other modification that needs to be made are the studs on this front brace need to be ground down. This is where the front mount intercooler is going to sit. So unfortunately the charge piping was very difficult and it took 2 sets of hands, so we weren't able to record. But now the process is done, we're going to be walking you through it. This is the intake section. It's very difficult. This will probably be the hardest part of the entire install, is this area right here. You can see it's super tight. There's not a lot of room for your hands or even a lot of tools. There's the intake, sits down there where we move that piece. Supercharger sits up here on the top. So right here is where your charge actually starts. As you can see, it's made up of 3 pieces. They kind of swirl down. They go to an S-bend pipe. Here it is from below. You can see those 3 pieces from down here. This leads over into the intercooler where the hot air coming off of the supercharger will get cooled down to be pushed back into the intake. The intercooler was surprisingly easy to mount once we got those 2 studs ground off. This is going to sit right behind the front bumper so it can get maximum airflow. Once the charge has moved through the intercooler and the air is now cooled down, it goes through this return pipe, which goes almost the length of the entire engine bay and goes back up into the intake. Here's another shot of the pipe going back into the intake. This is the one that comes off the turbo. There's the intake, so the camera is actually sitting where the filter is going to sit when we're all done. The only extra thing we did were these pieces here. Everything felt really solid, but we just wanted to make sure nothing was going to move around, so we put these hose clamps on here that we found in our local hardware store. So I'm also going to go over the oil lines. This is for the supercharger. This is the return line here. And this is the line that actually runs to the supercharger. They just have a banjo bolt that goes through those holes so that oil can flow. This is the return line. We were able to sneak it in between the headlight and the radiator mount. And it comes out here on the other side, kind of does this cool little twist thing and goes into the oil cooler itself. And there's the one coming out of the supercharger into the intercooler. Again, we were able to sneak it in between the radiator mount and the headlight. It's very important not to get these 2 lines mixed up, the in and the out. They're clearly marked, and they say several times on the instructions which way they go. If these are swapped around at all, you'll burn up your supercharger very quickly. The stock mass airflow sensor harness will no longer reach the mass airflow sensor since it's down in the bumper. So we're going to cut this And we're going to leave a couple inches to give us some room to solder. The harness that Active Autowerks has sent us to extend it, it uses crimps. We're going to actually be cutting those off and using solder so that we make sure we've got good connections.
Today's a big day. We'll be starting up the car after its supercharger install. All the fluids are primed, everything's ready to go. Big shout out to ECS Tuning and Active Autowerks for helping me through this process and hooking me up with this shirt. Also, big shout out to Jacob Crabtree, who's been helping me out through this whole entire process. So everything started up fine, no major issues. The coolant lines, the oil lines that run back and forth to the supercharger through its oil cooler, everything ran great. There was no oil leaks or anything like that. Only issue we ran into tonight was we're thinking that the serpentine belt is actually in the wrong position. You can see there's a couple different options. It's making a lot of noise, so we're thinking we're gonna move it back. Other than that, everything's on the cart and we're ready to run it in the spring.